Good morning, happy Friday, and welcome to another episode of Sick Call. I'm Staff Sergeant Scott McMenemy with the Valencia U.S. Army Medical Recruiting Station. Also with me, I have Sergeant First Class Michelle Phillips.
Hi, good morning.
And Sergeant First Class Michael Cube.
Morning.
Today on our show, we have Lieutenant Colonel Long with us. Lieutenant Colonel Long is a U.S. Army active duty entomologist. Thank you for being with us today, sir, and welcome.
Welcome. Good morning to everybody, or evening, wherever you're located. Just happy to be here to talk about my profession a little bit.
Awesome. Well, with that being said, can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Like you'd mentioned, I'm an active duty entomologist for the U.S. Army. Part of that is being a soldier and a scientist. I started my career where I have my bachelor's degree in biology and my master's degree in zoology from Middle Tennessee State University and my PhD in entomology from University of Florida. Go Gators.
Go Gators.
So that's a little bit of my background. But as we go through the rest of this, you'll see, maybe you'll hear a little bit more about what I do day-to-day basis.
So it's nice, sir. Could you tell us a little bit about where you've been stationed?
Yes. So, on active duty, my first duty station was Fort Carson, Colorado. And then from there, I moved to the Maryland area where I worked at Fort Detrick, lived on Fort Detrick, middle of Maryland, Frederick, Maryland. And then PCS'd after two tours there in that region, PCS'd all the way to Japan. And now I'm back in the Northern Virginia area. So a little bit spread out, I would say, given that Japan is several thousand miles away, but enjoyable nonetheless.
Sir, what's Army life like as an entomologist?
So, it's one of those things where, on the Army side, being an entomologist, it's has a lot of similarities to the civilian side in that, you're dealing with problems and situations related to, insects, arthropods, and how they affect human life, whether it's public health, whether it's economic entomology, how you go about controlling something that's eating something that you don't want it to eat, be it your home, your clothes, your food. On the military side, we primarily focus on looking at how it affects public health. So on a daily basis, there's a mix of things going on, and it's usually just focused on the medical entomology portion. And it includes quite a bit of reading and research, just staying up on current events in terms of entomology, looking at, trends or looking at situations across the world where, it's important. A lot of people don't realize this, but right now we have a couple of, mass locusts, migrations, infestations, whatever you would want to call it, on the other side of the world in India and parts of Africa. And, so understanding that and keeping up with that really does help on this side, because we do get those kind of questions. Will it happen in the United States? Murder hornets, another good topic. A lot of times people will ask me on the Army side, what's going on with this, or mosquitoes or ticks. And that's just part of the job, is to stay on top of that and to be, up on the current events. Other than that, it's really, a split between being a soldier and a scientist. What I described was mainly the scientist part, but being the soldier part, it includes physical fitness, and it also includes, your work as related to the Army, whether it's administrative, personal, or the like.
So, sir, have you ever been deployed?
So I've been technically deployed 3 times. I started my career back in 2000 as a direct commission into the reserves while I was in grad school, my first semester of grad school in Florida. And approximately 2 years into that, I was deployed to Afghanistan. I deployed as the executive officer for a medical detachment, and medical detachments are small units responsible for. It's basically the health department, a mobile health department for the Army when it comes to these large populations of soldiers that are deployed. And it covers anything around 18 to 20,000 people within an area. The medical detachment is there to do everything from water quality testing, air quality, soil testing, environmental assessments, and then my portion, the entomology and pest management. I spent 1 year in Afghanistan doing that as a lieutenant, and liked it so much. When I came back, I decided to come on active duty. And then after being assessed and brought on to active duty, I was stationed as an executive officer again. May sound like the same job, but completely different. The way things were done in 2003 had changed drastically by the time I came back on active duty because of Afghanistan, Iraq, and things like that. But I came back as an executive officer for another medical detachment, the one in Fort Carson. And that one, it was a little different in that the day-to-day changed because I was responsible for the administrative upkeep of the unit to make sure, people, the soldiers, their training was up to date, the vehicles were ready to go, and we were just ready and able to deploy. And we did deploy later on to Iraq. So I spent a year in Iraq as an entomologist. And then my last and final deployment, you may not consider it a deployment, but I was attached to the first area medical laboratory, and that's a large-ish unit that provides everything from what I just described all the way through epidemiology and laboratory confirmation for different pathogens. And so I deployed with them in support of Tomodachi, Operation Tomodachi, and that was the Army, or the response, not just the Army, the response in assisting the country of Japan after the tsunami and the Fukushima reactor incident. And so you're probably thinking to yourself, why an entomologist went with the AML. What I mentioned before about being a soldier and a scientist, you have to be a little bit more of the scientist sometimes and less of an entomologist, because you may be the only one. And I found I was one of the few people in there that could assist with what they were doing. So I spent the last 2 months of my tour in Japan with the AML, supporting internal monitoring and managing the teams that would go out and scan folks to make sure they were cleared of any sort of contamination. And being able to use my science background over just using entomology was a big help to the command. So those are my three. But then I was also served overseas, not really a deployment, and spent 4 years in Japan working for Public Health Center Pacific at Camp Zama, Japan. So a lot of travel in between all of that as well, not really counting as deployments. I've been to Ukraine and done work, as well as Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the country of Georgia, not to mention Vietnam and Thailand as well. So a lot of deployment, or a lot of travel, some deployment, some work, and then some just living.
So, sir, before I ask you this next question, what was your favorite place?
Well, to be honest, as an entomologist, I remember coming in thinking, that USAMRIID, USAMRIID's the medical facility or research facility in Maryland that many people equate to the movie Outbreak. So when I made it there, I thought, it can't get any better than this. But, having spent 4 years in the country of Japan, working with local nationals and then seeing the country, it really was hard leaving after 4 years, knowing that, that it wouldn't be the same, the same people, the same, countryside, the same views. And it's been 2 years now since Japan, and and it's it's one of those places where I'd love to go back in a few years and try to recapture some of that. So I would say Japan is my favorite, and then travel wise, all those other countries. I mean, I would have never thought that I would have spent a month in Vietnam assisting with training in regards to pest management, and to visit with the people and to see the countryside. Amazing. And the same could be said for any of those countries that I mentioned before, Thailand and Georgia as well.
So what about these centipedes you had in Japan?
So one of those things that, as an entomologist and people considering a career in Army entomology, it probably have some sort of living creature that they take care of, whether it's a tarantula or any number of arthropods, scorpions or things like that, or even centipedes. But in Japan, they do have a rather large species, and on base, I would find them all the time. They would come in the office buildings, they'd wander in there. And whenever I found a live one, I would keep them and just use them for show and tell whenever, somebody new to the area or somebody that had a misconception about some of these critters, I would be able to pull it out and show it to them. So, yeah, I had quite a few centipedes.
I think one of the things that is most impressive, sir, about your experience as an Army entomologist is all the different types of positions that you hold. And I know we were kind of talking offline about that, but I know that in your field, in the civilian sector, a lot of times it's a very niched position that they hold. Can you kind of speak on the different types of positions that folks can kind of, like you said, you already kind of touched on a little bit, but the outreach and those types of things?
Oh, yeah, it's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up because, again, I'll say it again. You're hired or you come on as a scientist, but you also serve as a soldier. So, that's one role right there. As you're in the military, and you've got that part to work to show others that you're in the Army. But on the scientist side, it does spread out, and I would like to kind of float this. My fellow entomologists probably disagree, but when we say entomologist, the first thing people think of are insects, arthropods. But really, it's what I like to call birds, bats, and bugs. And you're really a biologist, and your job there is to explain, any animal that comes into the area or a situation where it affects animals or plants or the environment. You have to be able to explain it. So having a background like a biology or wildlife or pest management, all of those I think they're all intertwined with the ability to talk about nature and ecology and how it's linked together. So some of these jobs that I've had, I started out as, like I mentioned before, an executive officer. That's a mix of administrative work and science. Afghanistan, I spent most of the time controlling snakes, doing sandfly research, collections, not many mosquitoes, mainly sandflies. And so it a little different than what people think. Iraq was mostly birds, was doing bird control and trying to get birds out of living areas and keep them away from the folks that were serving there. And again, birds, bats, and bugs. It's usually just biology. I spent a good amount of time doing a mix of administrative and science there, but with these research positions like the one at USAMRIID, the United States Army Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRIID, my job there was to do entomology, but I actually learned how to do the newer methods for DNA sequencing, PCR, cell culture. I learned all of those that I had only done those a few times leading up to it in classes, but there I had to learn because we were working in biosafety level 3 environments, looking at different pathogens and how they're transmitted by mosquitoes and ticks and you name it. So that was something that was new to me that I had to pick up along the way. And then while I was there, I became a kind of a de facto safety officer. I had to learn lab safety and things like that. So that became one of the extra things I had to do. My follow-on assignment at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, the RARE, I was the chief of entomology, of course, being an entomologist, but I also worked with 5 other entomologists, Army entomologists, and each one had their own job. One was managing the insectary and the mosquitoes that were raised there. Another dealt with vector control, things that we could do to, pesticides and practices that we could make use of in the field. And mine was basically knowledge management, and that really is just a fancy way of saying that I managed the Smithsonian's National Mosquito Collection. That's part of the Army that manages that portion of the Smithsonian, and we have about 2 million specimens there that we would take photographs of. We would DNA barcode. We created identification keys, electronic keys, using what we had on hand. So a lot of skills, a lot of extra duties associated with those, a lot of management, program management. So one of those things that you don't really think about when you're in science is, who in the early stages you're doing the work, but at some point you switch over and start managing those doing the work. And that was an example of where I shifted from being the worker bee to being the person managing the hive, to use entomology terms there. But my time in Japan was vastly different in that I was in charge of entomology, but I was also at one point the director of environmental health, meaning everything from water quality testing, sample collection testing, air quality, cross connection surveys. Those are all environmental based things. I managed those programs, even though I was an entomologist. And then later on in my career, the last year in Japan, I was moved over to serve as the lab director for Public Health Command Pacific, and we covered water quality samples of drinking water. We covered mosquitoes and insects and other things that were sent to us to be tested for pathogens. So, I went from, at USAMRIID learning about PCR all the way to Japan about managing a PCR lab. So along the way, you kind of, you move into those different jobs, and you increase your responsibilities, and a little bit that falls on you to keep up. And that's something that I, in my opinion, makes for a successful entomologist.
So you're currently working in a kind of a unique assignment. Sorry, I can't talk. Can you tell us about your current position?
So currently, after leaving Japan, I was assigned to the OTSG, Office of the Surgeon General, Army Surgeon General, and MedCom. They're co-located here in Northern Virginia, to serve as the staff entomologist for the medical command. In addition to that, I serve as the executive officer for the Public Health Directorate. And within the Public Health Directorate, we have everything from health physicists to occupational health doctors to public health emergency manager, biochemist, industrial hygienist, public health nurse. We run audiology. We have all of those specialties within our directorate. And my job is to make sure that, when it comes to writing guidance, basically instructions for how the Army is going to do things related to those topics. My job is to make sure it gets staffed properly, meaning written in a format and then published, so the Army can execute on those orders. So my job is to help all of those specialties, get the word out of what they need to do. My time there, I have to say I've spent more time working with things other than entomology, such as audiology. I've learned a lot about audiology, industrial hygiene, occupational health, all of those things kind of comes with the job when you work with those folks so closely. And then I was selected a few months ago to serve on a headquarters Department of the Army occupational planning. I'm sorry, not occupational, operational planning team for COVID, for the Army COVID response. So this is why I'm in my car. I can't be in the Pentagon, but I'm at the Pentagon serving as a public health subject matter expert in terms of how it affects how COVID affects the Army. So we write directions, guidance, policy, and push it out to the larger audience of the Army on how things from when you move from one place to the other, what's required in terms of testing and what's required of being, of isolating or quarantining, just to use those words loosely, but not technically, when you go into a country or when you leave, in addition to answering any questions that folks have. When I say folks, I mean, both Army, Navy, DoD level senior leaders asking these hard questions. And this team that we have actually comes in and does the analysis and answers those questions. So it's a unique position, and something that normally would not be thought of when you say you're an entomologist to be included on a panel of other experts. But again, soldier scientists, birds, bats, and bugs, and then another one is public health. So if you limit yourself to just being an entomologist in the Army, you may not have as a fulfilling or successful career. But when you open it up to those wider audiences, those wider concepts, you'll have more than plenty opportunity to learn and grow as both a soldier and a scientist.
I think, sir, you definitely highlight, the potential for opportunities for somebody in your field that, especially that folks wouldn't think of. And that's definitely, I think we're blessed today to have you, because I don't know that we could have had a better person to kind of show the variances that you can find yourself in as an Army entomologist, if you will. So with that said, kind of brings me to our final question for the day. Of course, part of this is recruitment. It's a big piece of what we're doing. We're healthcare recruiters, and there's no secret that we're looking for Army entomologists. So if you could go back in time and be given one piece of advice, sir, moving into your field as an Army officer, as an entomologist, what advice could you offer to folks that may be considering a move into Army medicine as entomologists?
Well, I would say it's maybe not a simple and one answer. It's probably, I'm going to go into several sub answers here, but the first one being that you got to be flexible, you got to be open-minded and be willing to accept change, because it's one of these jobs where a lot of things are thrown at you quickly and you have to be able to respond and react in a manner that that helps solve the problem. If I had to go back and tell myself some advice, I would say, hey, try to be more flexible and don't be so fixated on entomology. Try to look at the bigger picture and make yourself useful to a larger audience, to a bigger group. Because, and I didn't mention this before, we have a lot of opportunity within the Army as an entomologist. You'll typically serve in a medical detachment as the XO, or maybe even as a commander, in charge of those folks, in charge of those large areas, protecting the personnel that live and work and reside in those situations. And we also have research. I mentioned USAMRIID and the rare, but within that system, we also have research labs in Kenya, the country of Georgia, and also Thailand. So that's another aspect of something that someone could consider, that you'd want to travel and try to do research in other parts of the world. And then on top of that, we also have operational need. So I mentioned the public health commands and the Army Public Health Center. Those are areas where expertise in entomology is really needed to help drive, like I said, the policy to train incoming entomologists, different than basic training, but to train on how to use specific types of equipment, to do evaluations on new traps or new methods of collection, or even pesticides. So we have research opportunities as well. But if you going back to my original point, if you get stuck with just doing one of those things, I just want to do entomology, you miss out on a lot. And if you just wanted to do research and go to those areas, you'd miss out on opportunities to see a country like Japan or even Europe, to work in a public health command. If you decided you just wanted to do operational and not do any research, you miss the opportunity to work with some of the finest and wonderful people within the Department of the Army doing entomology, whether it's civilian or military. We have it's a rather small group, and some of the best people I've ever worked with, both military and civilian. So again, be flexible. Don't close yourself off to just being an entomologist. Kind of just stand back. My philosophy has always been just kind of stand back, don't say anything until you're absolutely ready to say something, and just kind of soak it in and see where and what is needed. And that goes to understanding that you do play a huge role within the Army, and it's up to you to try to find that role and find that niche to do that. So be flexible, be open to new things. Don't shut them down automatically, and enjoy what all these opportunities that make use of those, more so instead of enjoy, but make use of those opportunities that come up within the Army entomology system.
Awesome, sir. Well, once again, we'd like to thank you for taking time out of your day and being on our show, talking about everything entomology. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
It was my pleasure.
Again, thank you, sir. And this wraps up another episode. We also want to thank our viewers for tuning in with us live. As always, we welcome your questions. You can comment below or on any of our other social media platforms. We hope everyone has a happy, healthy, and safe weekend. And we look forward to seeing you again next week here on Sick Call.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you again.
Bye.